If you spent most of your Sunday afternoons in the 2000s and 2010s glued to BBC Two while three middle-aged blokes delivered pure TV comedy gold, then this car may just be familiar to you. Now live on PistonHeads Auctions is this Aston Martin Vanquish S. And on the 14th of November 2004, it joined a very exclusive club of cars that have starred on a little motoring show called Top Gear. Ever heard of it? Look, it's the same car. It's the Top Gear car. 26 years. That's how long it's been since this incredible Ian Callum design was unveiled at the 1998 New York Auto Show. Now that car was a concept, and funnily enough, it's actually for sale on PistonHeads as we speak. I'll leave a link to that down below. But the production car, when it arrived in showrooms in 2001, was left largely unchanged. The only significant tweaks were slightly larger fog lamps at the front, completely redesigned tail lights, and a more resolved rear diffuser. And that's about it. Now, the concept was called Project Vantage, as the Vanquish was intended to replace Aston's aging V8 flagship, a car so old that it had witnessed human evolution firsthand. But like a Georgian cottage, it was brimming with character, with big muscular arches and flared nostrils, giving it this incredible road presence. And even though the Vanquish is clearly more elegant than that, Ian Callum was still able to carry over some of the Vantage's attitude. Just look at the vastness of the bonnet, the haunches over the rear wheels, and the sheer meatiness of the back end. It's beautiful, but if you look at it the wrong way, it'd probably give you a black eye. It was clever too, because while the DB7 looked modern and high-tech, it was actually built on a chassis that shared a lot of components with the ancient Jaguar XJS. The Vanquish, however, was a clean sheet design, and the chassis was developed in partnership with Lotus and featured a bonded aluminium tub like the ones that you'd find on a Lotus Elise, paired up with a carbon fibre tunnel and fully independent suspension. So high-tech was the Vanquish that it laid the foundations for something called the VH platform. Now, it was a type of architecture that underpinned the DB9, the V8 Vantage, the V12 Vantage, the DBS, the second generation Vanquish. Heck, pretty much anything that Aston Martin produced for the best part of 20 years can trace its roots back to the Vanquish. And then, of course, there's the engine. Aston Martin carried over the 5.9 litre naturally aspirated V12 from the DB7 Vantage and dialed it up to 466 horsepower. Well, that's what it did for the standard Vanquish. But this isn't a standard Vanquish. This is a Vanquish S, and it's got quite a bit more than that. See, a few years after launching the Vanquish, Aston Martin came out with the DB9, a replacement to the DB7 built on the swanky new VH platform. It also came with a V12, which was more powerful than what was being offered in the Vanquish. And that simply wouldn't do. So Aston Martin started working on an S variant to put its flagship back at the top of the pile. And to do that, it needed to put in some work on the engine. We're talking about redesigned combustion chambers, tweaked cylinder heads, stronger conrods, and a whole lot more to unlock 527 horsepower, 61 more than the standard Vanquish. The S also introduced some very subtle design changes, as in blink and you'll definitely miss them. Now, you may have spotted that it has a very, very small front splitter. The nose was also slightly tweaked, and also the boot spoiler sits just a little bit higher than it does on the standard Vanquish, but otherwise the design was left untouched, which is a good thing because why mess with perfection? And the same goes for the interior. The only big change was that you've now got stitched leather on the waterfall centerpiece of the dash. And look at it, it's got buttons, including one beautiful engine start crystal clear one right in the center. You'll also notice the lack of gear lever in the center console, and that's because, like the standard Vanquish, the Vanquish S was only offered with a robotized manual with these flappy paddles to flick through the gears. Now on the pre-S, these were notoriously dim-witted and pretty damn jerky, so Aston Martin reworked it for the S variant, making them smoother, smarter and snappier. Like the owner of this gorgeous Aston Martin Vanquish S, you too can auction your car on PistonHeads. Just follow the link in the description, enter your details, and someone from our consignment team will be in touch. And be sure to register to bid because we have plenty of performance, classic and collectible cars going under the hammer, just like this Vanquish S. And here's what makes this one extra special. So let's cut straight to the chase and talk about this gearbox. Is it as bad as some journalists made it out to be 20 years ago? And the answer's no, but you have to drive it properly. Now instinctively, when you've got 2 pedals and 2 paddles, you just want to floor the accelerator, pull the right paddle and shift into the next gear immediately. But if you do that in a Vanquish S, you get a shift that's a bit like this. It's long, it's jerky, and it's the kind of thing that ticked loads of reviewers off 20 years ago when this came out. But this isn't a torque converter automatic, it's not a DSG, it's an automated manual. So I found the best way to drive it is drive it like you would a manual car. So when you go to change gear, you lift off the accelerator, pull the paddle, get back on the power, and it smooths out gear changes no end. And yes, I understand that's a bit of a quirk, but we are talking about a 20-year-old Aston Martin here, and to be honest, it's something I got used to within about 30 seconds of driving it. I've never had to drive a car in this way before, and it just seemed instinctive. You do have an automatic mode here. Most Vanquish owners say it's not worth using, just change gear manually. I've also found it absolutely fine on downshifts. Maybe I've been quite decisive in my instructions to the gearbox. I've not been downshifting while accelerating, but I've had absolutely no problem downshifting whatsoever. There were a few other changes that came in with the Vanquish S2. God, it's fast and sounds amazing. Right, sorry, where was I at? Oh yeah, other changes introduced on the Vanquish S. So it got slightly firmer suspension. The standard Vanquish is known for being just a little bit fidgety at times, and the revisions to the suspension certainly feel fantastic on this Vanquish S. The steering was sharpened up just a touch too. It was geared longer too to use that extra power to get it up to a claimed top speed of 200 miles an hour. And the brakes were naturally beefed up as well, because if you're going 200, something goes wrong, you're going to want to stop pretty damn quickly. Now, all of that was announced to the world at the 2004 Paris Motor Show, which is where this car was wheeled on stage and shown off to the world's media. After that, it then became Aston Martin's press car, so you'll see it in various car magazines from the era. It's still used in Aston Martin's marketing material. When I was researching this piece to get my numbers right, I went onto Aston's website and you would find this car under Vanquish S, and that's also why it ended up on a show called Top Gear. In the episode, Clarkson was driving this very car and comparing it to the then new Ferrari 575 Maranello, which was being driven by Steve Coogan off of Alan Partridge fame. It reviewed really well too, with all those little upgrades adding up to quite a substantial gain over the standard Vanquish. Now, ultimately, the 575 came out on top. The Stig actually took this car and the 575 out around the Top Gear test track, and it was the Ferrari that was just a little bit quicker. However, Clarkson, Hammond, and even Steve Coogan all agreed that the car they'd rather have was the Vanquish S. Now, unfortunately, I couldn't find a 575 Maranello to compare this with today, and trust me, I really tried. But from where I'm sat, this is living up to so many boyhood expectations. The noise is absolutely incredible, and it rides the road really well. Again, I'd heard that the standard Vanquish was a little bit fidgety, could be a tad tramliney, and wasn't the most well sorted of cars. But this S is absolutely magnificent. The steering's on the lighter side, but it feels in line with every other Aston Martin I've driven. It has the presence of a supercar, but it's a big, soft GT at the end of the day that just handles brilliantly. Not too firm, not too floppy. It's the Goldilocks zone. It's just right. We haven't even talked about the Vanquish being a James Bond car, and it was a really good one, with missiles that stuck out the grille, and target hunting machine guns, and a frigging ejector seat. Just a shame it was wrapped up in a really terrible James Bond movie. But I'm not here to get all geeky about James Bond cars. I did that enough in the BMW Z8 video. I'm here to celebrate a proper British modern classic, and a car that's extra special because it's featured on a show that has meant a lot, not just to me, but I think a lot to you as well. And I feel that TG connection just hits a little bit different now that we know that the original trio won't be coming back on our screens again. Well, not together, they're all doing their own things now. And it's got me wondering whether cars like this, ones that have actually featured on Top Gear, will be sought after a bit more by collectors. Because collectors are always after something that has an interesting story behind it, whether it's ultra rare or won X many races or was owned by somebody interesting. And I feel like the fact that this is the car that featured in a show that resonates so much with tens if not hundreds of millions of people, maybe it's going to make somebody go, I've got to have that car. I've got to build up the biggest collection of former TG cars that I physically can. I know, for instance, we had the TVR Cigaris that featured on the show a year later. It was up for sale on PistonHeads about a year ago, and it sold, allegedly to a buyer in a different country. That's how badly they wanted that car. That's how badly they wanted a bit of TG history. So now, over to you. You've got the best part of a week to get your bid in and own a slice of TG history. And if you're coming back in a 2 weeks' time, a month's time, a year's time, or 10 years' time, well, just let me know how those Top Gear car values are getting on.